So hello everyone, welcome for this webinar here on our academic career around the world. I'm really thrilled to have you all here joining us from all around the globe for what will hopefully, I assume it will be a very insightful and enriching session for all of us. This of course would not be possible without our panelists, so I would like to especially welcome them and a heartfelt thank you for being here. I know for some of you it's very early or very late in the day, so I really appreciate you making time for us. Also special welcome to Andy, our committee chair. So thank you for joining us. So I would just like to give you a very brief overview of our agenda today, so you know what's coming up. So as you can see, we divided these presentations up in two blocks to make it a bit more engaging for all of us. So we start first with Mariano, Shiva, and Sandro for 30 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A for about 15 minutes. Then we will have Teresa, Kenneth, and Bilgehan sharing their insights with us, and then we go for a second round of Q&A. So, and then we should wrap it up in about 90 minutes for all of us. So with that, I think let's dive right in, and I will hand it over to Mariano, who gets us started in Australia. So Mariano, I give you the floor. You should be able to share your slides right now. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I look forward to being here with this membership engagement community reunion, like Andy says. So good to see some familiar faces. And thanks for the warm welcome. And obviously, I'll try to be. I'm going to raise some provocations. I'm going to give you a little bit of perspective from what this academic life looks like being down under. I'm at Monash University in Australia, but I come from, my beginnings are half a world away. So I'm actually from a small island called Curacao in the Caribbean. Some people know that as the West Indies. So all the way in the south of the Caribbean, close to South America. So literally half a world away, 14 hours away from everyone I love and care about. Well, a whole bunch of them. And I did my undergrad there at the University of Curacao. And then I was lucky enough to do my PhD at Erasmus University, so in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. So my journey started from the Caribbean, went to Europe, and then somehow I ended up in Australia. Ended up in Newcastle first, and now since 2017, I've been in Melbourne, Australia. So quite the journey, as you can imagine. So this is the topic we're covering today is one that's very close to my heart, given the the realities of that. And I won't talk at you. I want to raise some questions that hopefully we can further unpack in the Q&A. Because when I want to think about international careers, it's easy to sit in a panel that says, oh, how to publish in top-tier journals and the like. But I would like to make this a more introspective kind of session. Perhaps it's my own therapy session, but to reflect on, a couple of questions of how did we get here? What do we want to get out of this? And three simple questions. What's the professional life you want? What's the personal life you want? And what's the community you want to belong to? These are three questions I'm going to raise here. I want you to think as I walk through, the quick realities and how that plays out in a place like Australia. So, look, in terms of the professional requirements, a lot of it is more of the same. Doesn't matter where you are, you have to do teaching, research, service, and increasingly funding, impact, and engagement. The extent to which you have to do different things or they're rewarded, it's a matter of degrees. You have to understand this very, very, very clearly before you make a decision on the professional life you want and the professional life you think where you can thrive. That's very important to think about. If your goal in life, in professional life, is to publish 10 AMJ articles, that's wonderful. And you should pursue that. If you think that will give you professional satisfaction, go for it. It'll be your biggest cheerleader. Is Melbourne, Australia, the place where that will be mostly rewarded? Is that the place where you get the greatest professional satisfaction for this particular achievement? Because there's about one way of having a fulfilling professional life. And if this is the one you want, you have to find a place where this matches, where these expectations are there, and then what actually this is rewarded. And make no mistake about it, also where this is remunerated. You know, we do have to pay bills as well, right? So make sure you're in a place that's consistent with that your outcomes are going to be consistent with the resourcing, the kind of recognition that comes with it. In a place like Australia, there's I find a good balance between the opportunity and incentive to go for quality according to traditional metrics of top tier publications, as well as a bit more leeway as well for volume, right? Differs a lot for institutions. My institution the premium is for quality. Basically, as a full professor, I have to publish aspirationally one good A+ article in a 5-year rolling window. Okay, sounds easier than it is, but it's a very reasonable kind of achievement. Obviously, I don't get paid $1 million, but it affords me other concessions in life. The challenge, though, is that in a place like Australia with these type of deals, it's hard to get in. Right? Once you're in, you're good, but it's very hard to actually get in. And a place like Monash, we were discussing that recently, we actually have very low turnover. So the recruitment is pretty tough on the front end. You have to think about it. If we are recruiting someone, especially internationally, it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort, a lot of risk for us to bring someone from overseas. Oftentimes, someone will keep you on the line and negotiations will fall through at the last minute. It's a big ask for us. So we recruit very, very strict on the recruitment on the front end because we don't have the revolving door, right? We actually want to have people in who want to be here and want to be here for at least a particular period of their careers, right? So think about that. I went to University of Curacao for my bachelor's. I would dare say most of you never heard of Curacao, let alone University of Curacao. I'm not very status sensitive. For me, where I come from, everything since my master's has been a bonus, right? So I've been playing in house money for 18 years, right? So my journey is very simple. I take the blessings I have and I run with it. Some people need or have a bigger desire for prestige and status. You have to decide what that means and what that looks like for you in that term as well. And by the way, nothing against Monash, because Monash is I'm a full professor at top 50 university in the world. So no shame in my game, but it doesn't necessarily always carry the status of prestige that some other universities have, right? That's fine. You have to think, it works for me. And you have to think what works for you professionally. Where do you want to see what fits that intangible status quality as well? The money, our salaries are public. You're not going to be a millionaire, but you're going to be comfortably, middle class-ish. Although everyone's middle class in Australia, but you're going to be comfortable in those terms. Tenure and probation, again, heavily unionized place. So your tenure and what we call probation here are different. Your academic rank and your job security are in parallel. So you can be a tenured assistant professor. Effectively, you can do it for your whole career. You don't have to go for rank promotion while having the job stability, right? So these are some of the tensions you have. And sometimes when you go on panel, say, oh, you have to make tenure, you have to make tenure. In Australia, you can pass your probation after 3 years and stay as a lecturer assistant professor for the next 40, if you were to choose that. Okay, so keep these realities in mind when you get advice that the context matters a lot for what rank means in relation to job security. Okay, they're not necessarily the same thing everywhere. This is one that over time I've been thinking much more about. Is what community do you want to belong to? We're inherently social beings, social animals, and by and large we have a need for belonging somewhere. Most of us here have uprooted our lives, myself included, to live somewhere else for professional opportunities that we didn't have back home. I'm very fortunate I've been able to do that. Life took me in this direction, but if you're in a position where you have choice, I do encourage you to reflect on this. What's the community you actually want to belong to, enrich, and contribute to? And this is not only about what it gives you, but how do you enrich the culture? How do you embrace the culture? How do you get embedded in it? What's your natural affinity with this? What's your affiliation in. Language. Do you want to be in a place that's an Anglo place, or do you want to be in a place that has different languages, perhaps something that's more comfortable, more familiar to you? English is my fourth language. So I operate in a place that puts that burden on me, right? So I make that choice, and that is what that's a good fortune I've had in life, if you will. Location. Australia is wonderful. Melbourne is historically one of the most livable cities in the world. Great place, amazing lifestyle, but it's absolutely far from everything. It is literally 12 past 11 p.m. right now. So this is my commitment to you, STR, just so you know. I'll stay up. So you have to think about what it looks like for you, right? There are implications to that. And I throw this one in there, the schooling one, because I have some friends who they were here over the weekend, and they were discussing where to live because of where they wanted their kids to grow up, what the communities they wanted to be part of. So with this question, it's a broader question about your life, and I am an advocate of having a life beyond publications. Like seriously, people, seriously, have a life. Right? And quickly, on the personal life, of course, these are mutually exclusive or exhaustive categories, but the lifestyle you want. I live in Melbourne. If you don't know this city, it's a city of 5 million people. Okay, I'm a city guy. Right, being in the suburbs is like my absolute worst nightmare. It's an absolute thing like I dread. I have friends who love it. If you see me in the suburbs, it's a cry for help. So I like to be in the city, and this city gives me that balance. So it enriches that for me. Family and relationships. My parents are half a world away. Right, that is a trade-off. Something I deal with. And the last open-ended one, mindful of time, is happiness. What will make you happy as a person? Everyone or most of us can relate to the feeling, or some of us can relate to the feeling that once you had that big publication, it's not that feeling, you're not as happy as I thought it would be. And you're probably pretty fed up with it, done with it, you just want to move on. It's not that elation. So there's happiness beyond your publications, beyond your work, and I encourage you to think about holistically as you reflect on your career and an international academic career, given the option. The last provocation I'll leave, so my next colleague can have the mic, whether we can have it all. And I'm at the point where I think we can probably have 2 out of 3 at any point. Well, we can probably optimize 2 out of 3 of these at any point. The professional part of it, the personal life, and the community we belong to. That's my provocation. I think we can do 2 out of 3. And I encourage you to think about this and think about what's your top 2 and how that can help you get a fulfilling international academic career. Pass the mic to my colleague, and I'm happy for more Q&A after. Thank you.
Thank you, Pitosh. Thank you very much. Shiva, I give you the floor. As Pitosh stops sharing, you should be able to share your slides as well.
Charlotte, for organizing this, and thank you, Pitosh, for raising all those provocative questions. My slides are slightly different, so I'm not focusing on those provocative questions, but more around how do we navigate this professional career. And primarily from the US job market requirement. Right? So if you think about the US job market, there are 3 key buckets. Research being your primary responsibility. And as an assistant professor, that's my primary responsibility, that I need to publish certain number of papers in top tier journals, and that's the primary focus. And what I want to focus upon is that how do we navigate this journey? Because frankly, the time that we all have on the tenure clock is very short, and it really, really requires a lot of planning. And the planning really starts the moment you join the job. And we need to be very clear about the end goal. And I think there are three types of planning that you need to do. One is that you need to really, really plan out your entire pipeline early, because 5 to 6 years timeline is very short, given that each paper review cycle is couple of years, right? So one needs to have a very clear pipeline in the sense that, okay, once I join the job, what are my papers that will go under review? And then what are my pipeline draft papers that I'm working on? And I would really, really encourage you that if you're thinking about tenure in US, you should have half of your tenure requirement submitted very soon as you join the job. And by the time you go on a third year review cycle, you should have a draft of your final papers, because if you're not there, then it's slightly late, because after your third year clock is done, you only have 2 years. So if you don't have a draft, you can't get through the research process, review process. So whenever you're thinking about your pipeline, account for the 2 to 3 year time that the review process takes. And if you and start counting backwards, and this pipeline planning needs to happen very early on. Probably as a doctoral students also, you can think about planning this pipeline, but certainly when you join the job, the pipeline planning has to happen. Second thing is that it's not just the pipeline that you're planning, it has to be a project planning and a yearly planning as well. So typically what I've seen people do is that actually you will have certain projects and you put them on a timeline saying, this is the project that I'm going to work on as a draft. This is a project where I'm exploring some data. So have different phases of your project in a year. And then you also need to plan your teaching time versus non-teaching time, because that's something which is very different. In teaching time, you're spending a lot of time in teaching. And one of the advice that I got very early on in my career was that think of this teaching time as a non-working time, but can you put something on the cooking burner, right? So when you are teaching, can you put your papers under review so that even if you're not working actively on them, you're not wasting time, right? So you can utilize your review process. And if you do this planning right, then you can actually put your papers under review before you teach. And that helps utilize your teaching time really well. So again, we all need to publish, but if a careful planning really makes that publication process easy. And third thing that I feel is very important when you're thinking about your research is your co-authors. And the way I think about co-authors is because most of the time you're spending a lot of time with your co-authors outside your family. So, and don't think of them just as a co-author. Also think of them as a friend, right? And the third thing is that when you're thinking about co-authors, you also have to think about that you're now transitioning from a doctoral student to independent researchers, right? It's very lucrative to say, hey, I will work with senior people, but then you need to balance it out, saying that am I able to project my independent researcher identity? And that's something that needs to be balanced out and needs to be carefully thought through. Again, very early on in your career, because the tenure clocks are so short that if you don't do that careful planning, then you lose on that. And then as I said, co-author is a person that you probably spend most of your time outside your family. So think of them as a friend first and then as a co-author. So that's on the research side. Other requirement is, of course, teaching, and we need to be wonderful, important. It's an important part of our responsibility. But again, we need to think about how do I manage my teaching time effectively? And I've seen various versions. Like some people use teaching time to work on R&Rs, and I personally find that very effective because R&Rs are very directed inputs that are required. And I find utilize my teaching time on that. Some people use that for new projects where you're not actively working on something, but you're brainstorming and exploring ideas. And there are other people whom I have found that they actually say that, okay, this is my teaching time. I'm not going to focus on research. So these are all personal choices. And you need to be clear about your choice in the sense that what works your research style, what works your teaching style. There is no one the thing that fits all. So one needs to be very clear about that. And then finally, service. And I think as an assistant professor, there are lesser of a service requirements from the university side, but it's more of an outside service that we do. And it's all helping you to build a career of an independent researcher. So if you think about my service, I have done very little in the within the university, but it's primarily doing the review, doing the STR workshops that we are doing. So all these are part of service, and this is not, and these are outside service. The university doesn't benefit directly from them, but it's also important for us to, it is important for to us to create that identity. And most of the service that I think of as a tenure track faculty is primarily outside. And it's slowly, the internal service starts, but it's very, very minimal, at least in the universities that, at least in my university, at least. So that's on the requirement of job as a tenure track faculty. And then Charlotte also asked me to talk about a little bit about the career path in US. So it's very simple. So it's basically an assistant professor, 5 to 6 years. Your primary responsibility is research and teaching. As I said earlier, service is primarily external, which is helping you build your profile within the community. It is more about establishing yourself within the research community. Then there is associate professor, which is again 5 to 6 years. And actually the responsibility doesn't change. It's just that keeps on adding. You have more internal service requirements. And I think even as full professor, it keeps on adding. You have more and more service requirements. So I don't think the life gets easier as you, even when you after tenure. I have not seen my colleagues' lives getting easier. So that is what I have to share. Happy to share my experience, etc., in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shiva. So now I would like to give the floor to Sandra, who takes her to South America. Good morning, Sandra.
Good morning. Good morning. Thanks so much, Charlotte, for putting this up. Thanks so much for having me here. I will offer a kind of different perspective. And I apologize to Pitosh because Pitosh saw some of these slides before, but I think it's appropriate here. Because actually, we have different people from around the globe here. I would like to offer something related to how scholars being from the global south can succeed everywhere or can thrive everywhere. So I think that, I didn't see Shiva's resume, but according to the Pito's resume, that's the classic story of someone that's from the global south that pursue his or her PhD outside in the global north and eventually become a professor, either in the global north or if she or he backs to the global south where they come from originally. What I'd like to offer here is a different perspective in which people that are pursuing their PhDs in the global south and the possibilities of those people go to everywhere. Okay, that's my main topic here. And I'd like to add this with you guys. So, well, my name is Pedro Cabral. I'm a professor of strategy at INSPER in Brazil. So I'm born and raised in Brazil. I got my PhD here in Brazil, although I have some visiting professor positions outside. So during my PhD, I had my PhD in collaborations with a French university. But I'm my PhD is from Brazil. I'm Brazilian from Brazil. So that's the place I come from. I'd like to share this perspective with you. I'm also an associate editor of the Academy of Many Perspectives. And for that reason, I apologize because I have a board meeting at 10. It's in half an hour from my time. So this I need to depart earlier here from this meeting. So the first difference is we need to recognize, guys, let me see if I can show. Yes, there is a gap. We must be honest. There is a gap between the global north scholar and the global south scholar. There is a gap. There's a huge difference. So that's the image of that made famous last year during the Olympics. So we don't have the same training. We don't have the same training. You don't have the same tools that global north scholars. So there is a gap. Doesn't mean that our destiny is to be in a lower ranking all the time. Charlotte's an example. She got one of her PhDs was here in Brazil. She was well trained here in Brazil. Lots of people can be well trained in India, in China, in South Africa, in Egypt or Lebanon, Mexico, Chile, and they can succeed. But there is a gap. Even with this training, we have a gap. Okay. And I think that's the most compelling contribution of management to the mankind is the 2x2 matrix. So I love the 2x2 matrix, and I can abuse of this device here to explore here the region of origin of the individual and where she or he got his or her PhD. So that's a rare event that we have. Someone that's from the global north, US, or someone from Belgium goes to the global south to pursue a PhD. Unless we have some star alignment, these are rare events. Charlotte is a kind of she has this profile for her reason, but this is rare. It's rare to happen. It's rare to have someone that the global that comes to the global south to get this PhD. And eventually, we have a global north. So someone that's from US got his PhD in US, someone that's from France got his PhD in UK, and that's a competitive advantage. That's a competitive advantage. Eventually, we can have guys like Mariano, who got he's from Curacao, got his PhD from the Netherlands, which is considered in the global north. It's a good school, it's a good university, plenty of connections, much more, less connections than Harvard, much more connections than the University of Curacao. So wow. I think that going to the Netherlands to Mariano in all sense was a turning point in his life, and they can catch up. So, and then Mariano can have some technology transfer role, or people that goes to the global north pursuit PhD can be back to their countries and go to the global south to do the knowledge transfer. And why I'm insisting to this arrow to the global south? Because there's one simple reason. You're going to have tax cuts in universities. You're going to have less jobs that you used to have before. And the markets in the global south, and with the election that in US that you guys have experience in US, I'm not sure if the US market is going to be that open. So jobs going to be in the global south. Whether you're from the global north or from the global south, be aware that the opportunity to live can be in the global south. And I don't consider Australia in the global south. Although Australia is in the south, it is not a global south. It's not. Technically, it's not the global south. And eventually have this global south, which have local PhDs. That's my case. So in which you have a huge heterogeneity. So if our strategy scholars studies out about heterogeneity, we have a huge heterogeneity in the global south. The average is low, but the variance is very high. In which we can have the global south very good schools, very good school. There are few, but they're very good school. They are comparable to the top 15, the top 20 in Europe, or top 30, top 50 top 50 in US. But there's a huge variance, and that can be an opportunity for you. So if you think about a career, whether by option or by the lack of option, so you must understand how the game is played in the global south. And I'll talk about the South American perspective and much more the Brazilian perspective, which represents which quite similar to the other South American countries. So if we go in this quadrant and we amplify here, that's an issue that you must deal if you attempt to have a career in the global south. And I'm talk about here the South American perspective. Let's take the example of the teaching load versus international orientation. So a main challenge that when you are in the global south is the teaching load. Normally, in the global south, non-negligible portion of the universities, they're public universities, state funded, in which the quality of students, they're not bad, they're the best students locally, but you're in countries that doesn't have the same magnificence of research. So you need to teach much more in those schools, those public universities, than compared to other leading schools in the region or in the global north. So if you are in a university in which you don't have that much international orientation, and regardless the teaching load that you have, whether high or low, what you need to do to get tenure or to succeed? Well, we can have local publications. If you are in Brazil, for instance, publishing local journal, plenty of local journals in Portuguese, some of those journals are in English, and eventually ABS1, ABS2 publication. Why I'm using ABS? Well, I think that's the best ranking that we have. It's the most international ranking in which it's fine. We have a good sense. ABS 4-star barely match with the FT50, so, or some UT Dallas. I think that's, well, sorry for the Australian ranks or the French ranks, but I think ABS ranking is most representative ranks. Normally, that's the ranking we use here in South America too, when we analyze profiles of people to recruit. However, you can be in leading schools in the global South, in South America, in Brazil. I can name a handful of schools in Brazil, Chile, Argentina, and Colombia, for instance, in which you can have a high international orientation and compelling, let's say, teaching load. And for that, for those universities, those institutions, in order to succeed, ABS4, ABS 4-star, and eventually FT50 publications. And say, why so that's, the salaries are not bad. If you are here in these schools, you make much more money than that in a comparable school in Europe, for sure. It's better. If you're in those schools, it's salaries comparable to state universities in the US. I don't compare with Harvard. I don't compare with Wharton, but if you compare with the state universities, the salaries is pretty much similar if you are in a high-end school here in the Global South. And it's possible to survive here and to have a decent life. As Mariano says, well, Mariano goes to the beach, he has a good life in Australia. I have a good life here in Brazil. I'm close to my family, and I can be international, I can be connected. So it's possible. So if you are in those, my point is there's lots of opportunities in the Global South, like you have in South Africa or in Egypt or Lebanon or Brazil, in which you can have connection to global North scholars. You can have positions in academic societies. You can be part of committee engagement in STR, Academy of Management, SMS. You can be invited to be editor of leading journals. And if you want, you can migrate to the global North. And eventually, that's what we have been doing here. Our students, we're sending our students to compete in the global North. I have some students that are in leading schools in the global North. So it's possible. So it's possible to have international career being on the global South. It's possible. But why you need to do this? Well, man, if you are in the global South, you must work even harder. So training methods, focus the quality over quantity, and try to be informed where the frontier is and where it's moving in order to catch up. So it's hard. Today, we have the opportunity to connect with people with similar interests like these forums or AOM or SMS. So in the interpersonal skills is very important for that. So it's something that if you are in this profession, you need to develop. You need to talk to people. People must know you. Of course, you must have a consistent job, but people must know you. And this is why I develop interpersonal skills to talk to people. I don't mean they need to brown nose people in conference. Don't do this. It's a shame. But talk to people, convince the people, make people know that you exist, and make people to know that your work is good and it's worthwhile to reading. And eventually, and a good opportunity is to invite senior scholars to our country. We have invited lots of here in Brazil, lots of senior scholars. All those strategy guys can imagine they were here, and eventually they when they visit us here, and I think can be the same if they go to South Africa, for instance, they are surprised. Oh, there's intelligent life down south. Yes, there's intelligent life. There are people that know different strategies, people that know about methods, people that are catching up the literature. There are people that can make smart questions during seminars, can have suggestions, and it's about connections. So my message of optimism is, well, man, we're no worse and no better than nobody. We're in the same pattern. And for option, some of you can be in the global south. That's my case. For some, it's a lack of option, but for some, it's an option to be here. I'm pretty sure that Mariano he's in Australia for option because he wants to be there. Because if he wants to move, he could be everywhere, and that's a different perspective. And if you are a junior or mid-career scholar that are in the global south, want to be in global south, consider to spend some time in a visiting position, a short time in the school, to understand how the game is played, even the corridors. It's important. It's important. Because don't be naive. Go there and see how the game is played. So that's my message. Don't be naive. Don't be naive, man. There's a first competition. Normally, people look us. People, when you meet people in conference, people look your badge, people stare, look to the other side because you're not from Harvard. And so be prepared to meet jerks. Our professors are plentiful. Nice people are plentiful jerks. You're going to be lots of jerks. People that look at your badge, doesn't look at you. Well, people, and it happens all the time, man. So, but be prepared for that. You're going to face those guys. But you're going to face lots of good friends. And jerks, you meet jerks in your country, you meet jerks in your building, you meet jerks everywhere. You're going to be jerks in conference, you're going to meet jerks in conference, you're going to meet jerks as editors. We are jerks when our editors or reviewers. It's part of the profession. It's part of that. Be prepared. And remember, you are not part of the cliques. No, we're not part. You're not connected. People that don't know you, so be prepared to work even harder. I work normally with Brazilian data. I must spend 1 page to explain that my data is good data. A guy that's doing the same data with the same work, let's say with a sample of firms in Oklahoma, they don't need to expand 1 page to explain why Oklahoma firms are generalizable, have external validity. And if you use data from Global South, we need to expand. It's part. We need to work much harder. And that happens when you are in China. It don't mean that China is not generalizable. 1 billion people, India, more than 1 billion people lives there. It's not generalizable. Are you nuts? But that's part of the game. That's the church, that's the gatekeepers. But be prepared to work even harder when you are this. And one advice, if you are in the global south and working harder, trying to publish, make lots of robustness tests, and your colleague next door doesn't value work, don't feel miserable. It can be the source of ignorance, disdain, or both, and you don't control. Principal Agents Theory 101, do only things that you can control. You don't control the behavior of others. It's gonna happen. Do your job. So just do your job. But at the end, the effort's worth. Well, it's a beautiful profession. I could make more money. I could make more money in the market. We have a high opportunity cost, and our profession allow us to be with good guys, with friends, learn every day, and they pay us for learning. That's amazing. We are paid to learn. We are paid to learn and to redistribute our knowledge. It's a joy in this profession. And then people pay me for that. So, and you have the opportunity to meet interesting people from different countries. Like Charlotte, I have the opportunity. I met Kenneth once in the academy, met Pitosh. So you meet people, are nice people. It's good. And you can do this being in the Global South. And most important, if you're from the Global South, your enhanced knowledge can help students evolve and practitioners make more informed decisions. You can make yourself heard in your country, in your region. Why? Because you have good theory and you have good methods and you can connect the dots. And most important, you can help others connecting the dots. So I stop here. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Sandro. Thank you also, Pitosh and Shiva, for your interesting presentations. So I will now give the floor to the participants. I would say you can ask them any question. So let's focus for now on the three presentations: Australia, North America, South America. So ask any questions related to the academic career, even if there was not a direct link with what is in the presentations. I'm sure we will try to answer any questions you might have. So I would just say maybe if you can raise your hand here and then personally ask your question, I think that's more that goes smoother. So if you can just raise your hand here virtually on Zoom, I will have a look here who's raising their hand and you can ask your question. I see there's one in the chat. All right, let me just, maybe I'll read. It's Eldar's question. So he asks, how can a new graduate be prepared for the process of recruitment? If you maybe could just give a little bit more information on how the job market maybe, or how the recruitment goes in your region.
Well, I'm happy to get it started. Thanks for the question, Elder. Let me give a quick perspective from the Australian side. And in the meantime, one of the service things, she speaks of service. Nowadays, I find myself often on recruitment panels as well. Something that I find important to also make sure the perspectives we have here are also represented in those kind of settings. Places like Australia have low turnover. So you have to, it usually goes cycles, 3 to 5 years when jobs become available. And you have to start early, you have to be on top of it. And it really helps if you can demonstrate a connection to why you want to be in a place like Australia or New Zealand. I'll lump New Zealand into this as well. So part of it is not only, again, for most of the big universities, we're all accredited by the same bodies. So the expectations, management of degrees aside, are going to be somewhat comparable. So you need to have publications, right? Just to stand out from the pack. You need to have teaching experience. Don't underestimate that, because that's the one skill that we can deploy immediately. So if you have some versatility in that as well. And it helps if you can demonstrate a connection or some form of assurance that you're serious about relocating to a place like Australia. Elder, where are you now, for some context? Or if you can put it in the chat, maybe. So maybe, in Turkey. Yeah. So and this is some of the realities that if we're saying the global south, global north, using Sando's classification, it's also issues with, okay, how quickly can we get you in? This issue with visa restrictions. You also have to, some places there's potential sanctions against them. So scholars coming in from them. We have issues with that sometimes with recruiting PhD students. So you need to find information about, okay, if you're coming from Turkey to Australia, you have to look at, one of the things you have to prepare for, one practical thing you have to consider, does your skill set match the skills requirements that get prioritized? Places like Australia put like a skills gap kind of list. And the argument, and Australia is very, very strict on immigration. And the argument you have to convince the Australian government, not the university, because let's say we want you still have to convince everyone that you are uniquely qualified for this role compared to a local candidate. Right? So there is some element of that you also have to start thinking about when you say, why Australia? What do you bring to Australia uniquely from the experience of Turkey? Right? So it's not a deterrent, it's not that it can be done. Sometimes there's a bit more work, and you have to be honest and open about these systems that are not against you individually. These systems are in place for miscellaneous reasons that we can agree or disagree on. But you have to be mindful of them, so it might be just a little bit more work for you to get considered. Okay, that's one perspective from the Australian side. Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I would like to add for South American, at least for the top 10 schools in their region. Normally, the recruiter is done in the AOM, so it's international recruiting. But I have a perspective in mind. Here, we are in a region, like in Turkey, where English is not the first language. English the second, and the vast majority of the population doesn't speak English. But those leading schools, they train the local elites. They want to like to have people that speak English, but people that are able to adapt. Because if I'm Turkish, well, I cannot if I would live in Istanbul or in Ankara, I wouldn't survive without speaking Turkish. Well, I mean, I need to survive, but I need to go to the soccer game. I need to choose a football team, either Fenerbahce or Galatasaray. I need to speak, you need to communicate language. Sorry if you are Besiktas fan, they didn't mention Besiktas. But at the same time, you need to engage the local population. So here in the South America, you have some foreigners here, and those who get on really well are those who adapt, who they keep the international standards, but are able to adapt, to speak their language, to develop local connections. If you are this kind of profile that have this open mind, cool, you're invited. It's an adventure. You're gonna be well paid. You're gonna have a high bourgeois standard of living. With the problems that we have in the global south, the security or poor public service sometimes. But you can have a decent life. But engaging the local populations, the willingness of engaging the local problems, to talk to people in the street, to go to the supermarket, you're going to meet people that speak English in the supermarket. So you need to develop the skills. Before this kind of profile, while the global south can be an adventure, it's a worthwhile experience. And the recruiting standards are international standards.
For North America, I would say that most of the recruitment starts at AOM. A lot of schools interview at AOM. And also, for a new graduate, especially if you're coming from the international market, you need to make some connections, and those connections are very important. And like, if you are targeting certain school, make sure that you meet certain people in that school. You can show up at their session, ask questions, send an email to them to meet at the AOM. So having some kind of personal connection so that they know your name and your work might be important for the North American recruitment market. And that typically happens in the AOM. AOM is a good place for that.
All right, thank you very well. Mariano, you have a question in the chat as well. Maybe you can address it there because I'm a little bit mindful of our time, and I definitely want to make sure that the other speakers have time to finish their presentations and get some questions as well. So if you don't mind, I would like to move forward to our second block. If you have any other questions, maybe put them there in the chat and we will get back to it after this session. So I know that Shiva and Sandro have to leave, but I think maybe Andy and I can fill in for any questions on North America, and I will do my best for Latin America then, Sandro, as well. So thank you very much. So I would now like to give the floor to Teresa. She will instruct us a little on the academic market in the African continent. Thank you very much.
Hi, Charlotte. Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's good to be in the room. It's been very insightful, obviously, listening to Sandro's very impressive presentation around global North, global South, and the movement. And I'm really going to pick it up from there because for me, I feel like I'm a classic case of what he was trying to explain, having been trained in the global South, but currently in the global North, and building an academic career here anyway. So that would really be the focus of what I'm going to be sharing, and just practical things around an academic career in Africa. So just to emphasize, so even though I'm the global SDR for Africa, I currently work at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. But I'll tell you more about this, just help you get you to understand why, obviously in a global world, there's no requirement that you are in the space where you operate. So my presentation really is around a positional academic career around the world. And like I said, I'm currently at the University of Bradford. I'm an assistant professor of business ethics and corporate social responsibility. I also direct international relations for the school. Just a brief snapshot of my journey so far. So like I said, I started my studies in Nigeria at the Ahmadu Bello University in Nigeria. So my undergrad, but my postgrad was in the UK, which is the global North based on Sandro's definition. But in terms of my working as an academic, that started off, I went back to Nigeria to do that. And after spending 5 years in there with a master's, obviously running an academic career, there's a requirement to have a doctorate done. So in my bid to be, to Sandra's point about working harder and trying to establish connections with the global north, but still getting the quality that you need within the global south, I moved to South Africa, which is still in Africa, to do my doctorate and post my experience in, or my studies in South Africa. Now, I was based as an academic in South Africa prior to returning or moving back to the UK to continue working as an academic. This point I bring in just to highlight the fact that as a scholar, as an academic scholar, or building an academic career, it doesn't matter where you're coming from, whether it's a global south, which comes with its challenges, getting access to the right resources, getting access to the skills needed to compete effectively, seen as the industry is quite a competitive industry with a lot of requirements of you. So in that sense, this gives a picture as to why I'm speaking about Africa, really. So in terms of role expectations in Africa, and I think it's important to highlight that when I say Africa, there are 54 countries in Africa. There's 4 different regions, north, south, east, and west. And each of these regions are relatively different in the way they operate. For example, with teaching, in my experience in Nigeria at the Federal University, Lafayette, you will tend to do a lot of, or what I was doing, a lot of undergraduate teaching, big classrooms, quite a heavy load, a lot of marking and assessments, not so much research. However, on the research aspects, there's still a responsibility to publish, but this wasn't so much about publishing quality research as much as it was about publishing quantity research. So you might find that the temptation to publish in all kinds of journals are a lot higher when you're in these sort of contexts. Contrast this with my experience in South Africa, which is the southern part of the continent, where the teaching was more regulated, still undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, but the requirement for quality was in your research was a lot more emphasized. So even though there's still a need to publish the number, there is a reward for publishing quality. So classic example at the Gordon Institute of Business Science, which is part of the University of Pretoria in South Africa, where I worked for 4 years post my PhD. You were recognized for publishing book chapters or publishing in level 1 or level 2 journals. However, when you were able to publish in like a level 4 or an FT50 journal, you will get remunerations monetarily. So really to encourage more of the faculty to publish quality research, they had to be like other ways of encouraging these sort of publications, which wasn't available from my experience working in Nigeria, where the requirement was either to publish or perish. As far as community service is concerned, in both institutions, so Western Africa, Southern Africa, there was a requirement to be a part of the community, but this looked different in these 2 parts of the world. So whereas with Nigeria, community service was participating in either policy influencing, trying to influence policy-related research, or trying to engage in actual community service. In South Africa, it was more around consulting. So being highly invested in businesses in the country and trying to work with them to develop strategies and improve the way they do business. So it was still all classed as service, but there is a bit of nuance. And I think this really highlights the fact that Africa as a continent is heterogeneous in the way it operates. So having an academic career will be very different depending on where you are. Just in terms of tenure, we in neither of these universities did we run the US type of system that Shiva shared. So you would typically get hired or have a fixed term contract for a year or so, and then post that you will get a full-term permanent position that, you know, would go for the entirety of a career with these institutions. Money, well, there was a popular saying in Nigeria that the reward of a teacher is in heaven. So you don't get a lot of money, just to put that out there. But this was very different from what was available at Gibbs, where Gibbs is a Triple Crown accredited university, the 11th, so highly ranked institution. And as such, because they were requiring a lot of quality and they're requiring a lot of prestige from the academic, this was rewarded comparatively to the sort of earnings that you would make in United Kingdom or in America. It is quite comparative in that sense. The last thing I would say, and this really builds off of Sandro's point about being a Global South academic scholar and really trying to establish your place in the industry. From my experience, what I found was that there was a big requirement of me personally to internationally network. So even though you're based in Nigeria or based in South Africa, there was a need to almost put one leg in and one leg in the north, just so that you can get connected to these networks or can get connected to these ways of doing research or new ways of doing teaching. But it was of absolute necessity in my journey to bring me to obviously where I am currently teaching in the global north. So international networking could look like conferences or webinars like this. At the time I was doing my PhD, conferences had to be attended physically. So it's great that at the moment there's a lot of opportunity to join conferences and webinars from the comfort of your own home. Obviously, you will still need good data, but it's imperative if you're thinking of an academic career that is global, in the sense that you will be able to function across regions and locations. I thought it'd be useful to highlight, I see that in Charlotte's brief, there was a requirement to highlight detail on PhD programs. And I thought, you know, to the point that there are different universities or different countries in the continent, I thought it was useful to just highlight some of the top business schools across the continent. Like I said, this South Africa's Gordon Institute of Business Science is a Triple Crown accredited university. There's the Lagos Business School in Nigeria, which is also AACSB and AMBER accredited. And what you will notice from these programs is there is a lot of emphasis on accreditation. And I guess it's the way a Global South institution tries to establish legitimacy in the entire industry. So if there was any interest in pursuing some of these programs or finding opportunities for work, you know, these are some of the institutions, but there's so many more. I've only picked 5 of them. There are many more at different degrees. So if your interest is in the continent, you will need to obviously put these into consideration and do a lot of research to find what meets your needs, so to speak. Just in closing, I thought it will be useful, just based on my story as a Global South scholar working in the Global North. One of the things that I've recently published an article on diversity, equity, and inclusion and moving research forward. And one of the key points of our paper was around positionality and the fact that because positionality captures the interplay between space, context, and identity types, even though we're academic researchers, we are still almost trying to identify who we are. So there's always a requirement to understand what your worldview is, because it's from a strong position and an understanding of you as an individual, that you will be able to function effectively. So I thought, regardless of whether you're a Global South scholar or an African scholar, it's important to recognize what is your position and what does that mean for the way you engage with an academic career. So this is a quote from that paper. By all means, feel free to have a look at it at your own free time. But just to highlight that I've highlighted the fact that I'm a Black Nigerian female immigrant. I've been an immigrant for a big portion of my life. And when I try to build my academic career, that is something that's in the forefront of how I build my academic career. And I've really had to dig deep to try to understand who am I, back to Pitosh's point, and who do I want to be in this world of academia. So my encouragement is, if you're deciding to pursue your career, there's no limitations really. The only limitations are the ones that you would put in front of yourself. And I'll leave you with this provocation, and I hope that whatever or wherever space that your career takes you to, that it's one that you are fully in control of and that you fully take responsibility for as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Thank you very much for sharing that. It was very interesting and indeed food for thought, I would say, for many of us. Thank you. So with that, we fly over to Asia, where Kenneth takes the floor to give a bit more insight of the academic career there.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me and see my slides? Yeah, okay. Okay, thanks for the invitation. Thanks, Charlotte, for organizing this really, really interesting and helpful session. I really enjoyed the sharing by the panelists. So today I will cover a little bit of academic career in Asia. So obviously Asia is also, very broad with a diversity of, different kind of economy, developing, and so on. So I'll try my best to highlight some of the key ones in terms of, academic career and hiring and recruitment, and compare them with the global North or North American or European institutions. I'm Kenneth Wong from National University of Singapore. I'm a professor there, and I direct the Management of Technology Innovation program. Okay, so I'll just give a very quick overview of my background, and followed by an overview of, so that you know where I'm coming from, an overview of then the career in Asia in general, focusing of course on business and management schools. I'll talk about job applications. I'll talk a little bit about career progression, which many of the panelists already shared, right? Research, teaching, and service. So I'll focus on these few economies or regions or countries: Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan. A lot more emphasis will be on Singapore and Hong Kong, because that's where I'm from, Singapore. I'll talk about some select school in China and compare that to the situation a little bit in Korea, Taiwan, and Japan. Okay, I'll talk about promotion and tenure standards. And I think Charlotte also asked me to share a little bit about research grant and funding and so on. So I'll talk about those situations as well, with some closing remarks. Okay. So just to give you some context, I was actually from Asia. I grew up in Singapore. I spent almost 10 years in the States doing my bachelor degree there at Johns Hopkins, and then I went to MIT for my PhD, and I decided to come back to Singapore to become an assistant professor, first in the Singapore Management University for about 8 to 9 years, and then I moved to NUS, right, National University of Singapore. I'm in both the Department of Industrial System Engineering and Management and Strategy and Policy in NUS Business School. Okay. So I do some editorial work as well. I'm the Deputy Editor of Management and Organization Review, which is the official journal of IACMR, which is like the AOM-like society in China. And I'm on the board of AMJ, SMJ, Org Science, and Technological Forecasting and Social Change. So, okay, so I talk about this. I did my PhD in the States. Okay, so I do a lot of work on innovation, technology, strategy, IP, digital strategy. So from that kind of background, a little bit of because of my training, right, as well as engineering, as well as at MIT, more in the technology management and strategy side of things. So I tend to kind of bridge things, and I'm very more phenomenon-driven researcher. I publish quite widely the typical AMJ, SMJ type of journals, as well as the Science and the PNAS and other IEEE journals. So you can kind of get my research policy as well. So kind of my background in that sense. Okay, I do some consulting work. This is not required for many institutions, but I'll talk briefly about those as well. Okay. So just to a bit of overview on this. So Singapore and Hong Kong actually are in fact quite similar to the US, okay? Standard, to put it very simply, for progression and tenure, right? So in China, it's a vast country, and so there are usually a few select schools which are more like the US in terms of tenure standard. For example, you can think about, Peking University, Tsinghua, Zhejiang, Tongji in Shanghai, and so on. So there are only a few select schools in China which have usually dual track. One track is the foreign track, which is more like a tenure standard in the US, and then there's also the domestic track. And then there is a institution like CIPS, right? The China European, International Business School, and they are a little bit more also like the US, but they focus a lot more on teaching, executive teaching, and so on. Okay. For Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, they are, slightly more less US-like. They are aspiring to publish high-quality papers, many of the scholars, but because of maybe perhaps institutional constraints or local constraints, a lot of the scholars in Korea, Taiwan, and Japan, they also tend to focus on more local issues as well as national kind of level issues and compete less vigorously for the top-tier journals. Okay, so in my sharing today, I will focus more on Singapore and Hong Kong and maybe some select school in China. Okay, so in terms of the job applications, AOM, as the previous panelist mentioned, is a big place where we tend to hire, from Singapore and Hong Kong. I was involved in the hiring or recruitment committee at various times of my career. So tend to be, usually from the October to the February period. We know that now things are shifting a little bit earlier and earlier, right? So Singapore and Hong Kong are kind of following that with the US leading research-intensive universities. So AOM, SMS, AIB, Academy of International Business. It's good to meet in person. Otherwise, it's possible to do it online, followed by campus visit. And I think this apply across the few schools in Singapore and US where I am now, and Singapore Management University, NTU, right, Nanyang Technological University. So they tend to follow similar formats. In Hong Kong, the major research university as well, conferences, interviews, followed by a few campus visits. Usually we fly out 4 or 5 candidates. Career progressions. Now I think we increasingly see people moving into different tracks, right? So for a research-intensive university like NUS or SMU or NTU in Singapore and in many of the Hong Kong institutions, most of the faculty are still research track or tenure track, right? So they are up for tenure after usually a period of 7 years. SMU has 8 years tenure clock, and NUS is 7, usually 7 years. But there are also people who go into the educator track or the practice track, right? So the educator track, teachers, they tend to teach double the load of the tenure track. So if we were to do 3 courses a year, the educator track will be hired to do 6, right? But at the same time, their research requirement is not that much or not as heavy as the tenure track faculty. And practice track faculty are more like clinical faculty in the US. They tend to have years of experience in the industry. They bring in unique perspective from their firm, and then they can put that in and complement other faculty in the classroom, or they run more specialized courses and so on. So we have also a very few practice track faculty. So research, teaching, service, administration, these are the key ways where your career progress. I'll talk about that in a little bit in the next couple of slides. And also then research grant, not critical for business school, more critical for engineering and design, but increasingly business school are also kind of pushing for a little bit more research funding and grant to show that you can actually have the ability to secure external funding, right? Okay. So research, I think the previous panelists have already talked about this. In Singapore and Hong Kong, the standard is quite high, so very comparable to the leading US research-intensive universities. You have to publish in top-tier leading journal paper. There's really no count, but they look at your profile holistically. But you know, people understand after 7 years, you need to have, you know, a minimum number of major publications, right? I mean, book chapters are nice, but they are, you know, more supplementary, right? And others. Right? So editorial roles are important because they showcase your impact in the community, how well you're recognized as a scholar, and also you take on, you know, you give back, right, to the journals, to the community. So editorial roles either as editorial review, ERB, right, editorial review board members, or as, you know, editors, associate editor of leading journals. Of course, citation are important, right? It's easy to look at Google Scholar and other sort of citations. So it's an important part of the portfolio or the package when you go up for tenure. You know, media mentions, you know, I often, you know, sometimes go on interview with medias, you know, TVs or newspaper, you write, you know, opinion pieces, you know, commentary for them. So those are great to kind of expose you, and increasingly they think about translational impact. So whether you are doing research and how does that translate to insights, right, for the industry and for lay people, right, knowledgeable people who want to learn a little bit about what you're doing, right? In my case, you know, technological innovation or strategy or intellectual property rights. So I write some, you know, commentary pieces for them. So these are viewed very positively by the school, but they don't replace, you know, the leading journal papers. Research grant, more about that later. Okay. So teaching, we have two sources, which is typically, I think, similar across many universities. Student evaluation, right? They give you, you know, after every semester, student give you a rating plus the comments, which people pay attention to. And then also, before you come out for tenure, they will have a peer review session whereby other professors, maybe 2 of them, will sit in your courses, and then they will give comments, right? So they will say whether you're a good teacher or not, how you could improve, or there are things that you have done well or not, more evaluative, right? But they are also during your, you know, your midterm after 3 years, they come in and provide helpful feedback, right? So that's more kind of a mentorship. But this is when you go for tenure, it will be a little bit more evaluative. Teaching awards would be great if you have won some teaching or university or college level teaching awards. Those showcase your commitment and your ability to teach well. Service and administration are part of the package, but for assistant professor, as other panelists have mentioned, they are not critical, right? So usually, like a leading US university, they will put an assistant professor as a, you know, seminar coordinators, for example, right? Or sit on a couple of committees, you know, recruitment committees in the department, right? So those are the typical. But as you move from associate to full professors, then the service administration requirement become a little bit more. For example, I'm directing programs. I'm involved in, you know, several search committees, right? Even for, you know, dean or department heads. Or, you know, when there are other initiatives at the university level, sometimes people come to you, right? So you're expected to take more of a leadership when you move from associate to full professor, right? At the department, school, university level. And then also you are supposed to be seen as one of the leader in the academic community, right? Either as a, you know, associate editor, you know, ERB members, and so on. And you organize conferences, so those are good as well. So for promotion and tenure, there will be usually after every year annual review, right? At the department level, you will go up to the school level. And then I mentioned tenure review and promotion to associate professor after usually 7 years, based on the research, mostly teaching and service requirements. So research, teaching, service. And they will be, to do this, there will be a process usually that runs from 6 months to 9 months, right? Sometimes a little bit longer. You will have report from your, DEC, right? Department Evaluation Committee, right? Committee member that's formed at the department level. Maybe there will be 1 or 2 senior faculty from your department and 1 from another department. In my case, there might be somebody who is more technical, and then 1 or 2 professors from business school and so on. And the school, and this report will go up to the school level. Plus, they will ask for external recommendation letters. Usually, in many US institutions, it really depends. Sometimes 8, sometimes 12, sometimes 16, I've heard. In NUS or SMU, usually 6 to 8, right? But they want a different set of letters when you go up from assistant to associate and from associate to full, right? So you have to network, you have to talk to people. People have to know you, sometimes through your editorial involvement, sometimes through conferences like AOM or SMS. But typically you don't approach the letter writers, but sometimes you have to talk to them, of course, at conferences, so that's fine. And the school you will nominate a few names, and the school will also nominate an equal number of names, and then together they'll put together several names, and then they will get the letters. So impact-wise, I mentioned this citation is important. So sometimes they benchmark against, folks who graduated in the similar, plus minus 3 years. And then now they are also, say, going up for associate professor or full professor, so some sort of benchmarking there. Editorial roles, do you play a key role as editors or ERB members? Leadership in academic community, STR activity. I've actually done quite a bit, organizing workshops, teaching workshop, research workshop, junior faculty consortium. I've done quite a bit of those. So, and then conference organization, I've organized a few conferences. So usually I expected to do some of those, right? And of course, they look at your visibility in terms of if you are invited as keynote speakers, panels. So I've quite a bit of those. So those are also seen as very positive, right, of your impact in the community. So research grant, I'll mention that in the next couple of slides, are increasingly important, as I mentioned, but not critical for assistant to associate, right? But more and more important now for maybe associate to full, and then even business school are paying attention to that. Okay, so promotion to full professor usually is typically the same research teaching service. A little bit more, you need to be excellent in research and teaching, a little bit more duty on the service side, as I mentioned. Okay, and once you are full, you can get chairs.
Do you think you can round up, because you're already over time, and I want to make sure that Bilgehan also has the time to finish his study. Thank you.
Okay, so I just want to show this. I think this will be in the video. You can apply for all sorts of research grant, and here are some websites where you can look at the research grant, and you can apply for them. So usually you need to be able to demonstrate the ability to secure some level of research grants, right? Scientific, scholarly merit, originality, feasibility, and so on, right? So these are some of the key criteria. I'll leave it here, and then you can review these criteria at the video. Okay, so some concluding remark. Asia is important engine for growth. It has a diverse set of country, economy, and culture, and many locations to choose from. There are many livable cities. For example, Singapore is one. Provides plenty of very exciting opportunities, and they offer competitive salary and research support. So if you want to be, for me, I'm closest to my family, you want to be in this part of the world, there are actually many choices to think about. So when you explore an academic career opportunity, if you finish your PhD elsewhere in North America or Europe or other places, you can think about opportunity in Asia. Okay, thanks very much.
Awesome, thank you very much. So without further ado, come on, Bilgehan, it's your turn now. There you go.
All right, do you hear me? And hopefully now you can see my slides.
Yes, all good.
Great. All right, like being the last year, I was probably wrong about even bother preparing slides. But yeah, many thanks for the organizers and the panelists. I enjoyed it, also catching up, I think, or seeing some familiar faces and friends. I mean, I will also use my chance to kind of being last to turn into an advantage, maybe to wrap up a little bit what has been said and maybe apply that to Europe. So my focus will be basically in the European academic career, maybe highlight some of the myths, realities of European market, and some opportunities, of course, for people that are interested in. So I will, I think, touch upon many of the things that have been mentioned. I have been taking notes. So Mariana also, I think I will highlight the community you want to be part of, right? I think is important. What is rewarded institutionally? And Sandro left, unfortunately, but for his presentation, I could just take out, I think, Global South and insert Europe, and many of the things would apply. I think it depends on where you put your reference point. If your reference point is, let's say, the US style, like the US top tier school, then I think Europe will be kind of applicable in terms of the high heterogeneity, variance, right? So that I think applies also very well. Anyway, so let's go. I mean, I'm very happy to be here. Also, as I said, I was previously engaged in the membership engagement committee, so I'm very happy to see you guys. Some caveats, of course, I'm truly European. I would define home as the triangle between Turkey, Netherlands, and Spain at the moment, I think. So that's basically what I call home. But as a caveat, I can tell you that, if you're interested in a particular country dynamics, which will link into my first myth, that it's not really homogeneous. So I'm not an expert on Croatian or Denmark or France in general, but yeah, my big bunch of my professional life has been going in Spain and Netherlands. So I'm an associate professor in SAD Business School. Before that, I was assistant professor in Utrecht University in the Netherlands. I did my PhD again in Spain, in Barcelona, in IESE Business School. So I'm back basically. So in total, I lived, I think, more than 10 years, 11 years now, I think, in Spain. And I'm by training engineer, even though I wouldn't call myself an engineer anymore. And I did an MBA while I was in Turkey. So some myths about the European academia, and I have been also involved in hiring committees, and I would just recommend, because people were asking advice about the job market. I think this happens more maybe for candidates coming from the US or Asia, maybe Australia as well, I don't know, but big, I think, continents and I understand the distances are different in Europe versus these places. So seeing Europe as a homogeneous place is the first deal breaker for, I think, any European school. Top or not top, doesn't matter. When I'm in the hiring committees and we do AOM interviews, any interviews, that we hear that, okay, I'm also applying Europe. Like, sorry, but Croatia and Stockholm and Sweden and Spain and Ireland and Poland and has nothing in common if you think about the things I will mention in a second about the institutional and cultural differences. The other myth, I think, is kind of related to that, is that Southern Europe is kind of having the negative stereotype in terms of more bureaucratic, less developed digital infrastructure, whereas North kind of benefits from a positive stereotype. I would kind of argue against that slightly. So in my time in the Netherlands, for instance, I was frustrated a lot while it's benefiting from, developed Western world mindset. Inertia, or the system is developed and overloaded, there are supply problems, etc. Whereas in Spain, I wasn't expecting to have such a digital infrastructure in general. Like, you can actually do pretty much everything by achieving like just this digital certificate that allows you to get everything done with the government or sending grant applications, to do anything basically in a very centralized way. So yeah, the hiring practices, in that sense, the first myth, I think, is kind of very related to this. There's a huge heterogeneity. I mean, the way even the positions are labeled, right? So in UK, there's lecturer, senior lecturer for assistant and associate position. In Germany, we have an habilitation system, right? Whereas in, for instance, countries like Netherlands, you have more postdoc systems active in that sense. Political system vary a lot. Of course, the rising right wing, and I'm very happy to be in a country that did not, Spain is the only remaining large European country that doesn't give in yet. Let's say we have a still left-leaning government. So this also affects, of course, the budget cuts, what is expected in terms of Language requirements, which is also, I want to mention that English is, of course, in the research, no discussion, dominant language, but I know in Netherlands, after I left, the tendencies, for instance, to push for more Dutch in the classes that are taught. So some people are obliged in Belgium, I think, to get the even promotion to associate. You need to learn certain level of Flemish. That sort of stuff, I think, is on the rise. So it could be critical in some institutions. And of course, various cultural norms. No, I'm being Southern European myself and having lived in Northern Europe. I mean, the way you approach things, even within the institution, changes dramatically. So I had this example I like giving always about, follow-up emails. For instance, in Netherlands, I asked someone in admin to do something for me, and they said, okay, I'm working on it. Let's say in 1 week you send a reminder or follow-up. What happened to that? And that person was angry like crazy because I made a follow-up saying, I told you I'm working on it. You don't trust me. Whereas in Spain, imagine I ask something from the IT, and 1 week later, if I don't follow up, and it's a difficult thing, let's assume, that basically you're going down in the priority list of that person sometimes. So it's a completely different mindset. You might get frustrated by that, but this is one example of the huge heterogeneity you can see in Europe. Tenure track, of course, the institution that I am in, ESADE, plus other, I think, top schools follow very much the American system with maybe a bit of a lax requirements in terms of how many publications you require. But I think the requirements are quite similar in that sense. ABS or FD50 journal publications are required. But there's, again, a huge variation there in terms of, in France, for instance, you start being tenured. So because we have a very strong, let's say, social security system in Europe, I think the tenure definition of tenure, right? The job guarantee is kind of provided per se when you are employed in a public institution. And I think most of the European institutions that are top, there are private ones, of course, but many are also public. So the moment you're hired, for instance, in France, in a university, you are actually tenured. Like they cannot fire you by default. Of course, there's the requirement process, etc. Or in Netherlands, for instance, I had my own tenure process, and coming from ESA, which follows, I think, very much the Harvard type tenure system and the education, I was shocked that I saw also, I think Mariano mentioned, seeing business cards that say assistant professor in parentheses tenured. So I was raised thinking that associate and tenure were hand to hand, but it doesn't necessarily is the case in most European institutions, I can say. So permanent positions, and language requirements can vary. And I mean, some of you highlighted about, Sandro said, like you should engage with the local community, etc. Of course, assuming that you are from there, right? So I am living 11 years in Spain. My Spanish is very good, but I enjoy being in Barcelona, but there's of course an additional language, Catalan, here. And my son, for instance, speaks 5 languages default. So he speaks Turkish, Dutch, English, Catalan in school. And ironically, the language he's least exposed is Spanish in Spain. But he speaks 5 languages fluently at the age of 5 now. So this is, I think, a great, let's say, richness, but it also comes with, of course, its own challenges. In terms of, I think, European market, it's impossible to avoid, let's say, mentioning the European projects, right? So some of you, I think, Kenneth also mentioned the grant scheme. I think if you're thinking of a career in Europe, no matter where you are, it's some institutions value this more than the others, but it's very significant to get this European level funding schemes, the ERC, European Research Council, Marie Curie, Horizon. Also, there's national funding boards, the State Agency of Investigation of Spain, or Dutch NVO. These are examples for that. And these institutions kind of make you think out of, again, your own world, right? Or like your own area, for focusing only on the management journals or management co-authors, strategy co-authors in particular, but to do a more cross-disciplinary collaboration. So you can write a big grant application with legal scholars, sociologists, psychologists, you name it, different areas, different backgrounds, asking for this type of, and very highly competitive grants. And if you get this, I think the result is basically you start paying your salary or part of your salary, hire lots of postdocs or research assistants to work with you. So that's in very typical road in most European schools, I think, to get both promotion and progress in your, and independence. No, that's very important. So I recently submitted a ERC grant myself, and there's a separate part that you have to provide evidence that you are able to, for instance, independently publish or do research without your supervisor, your PhD supervisor. So these things are, I think, quite important. Linking back, I think, to what some of the panelists say, I think Mariano including talked about this. So Europe is kind of a very high variance location in that sense. So you have like the institution that I'm at, I think follows the typical top journal game, but in Netherlands especially, I saw a huge variation. There's life out of, let's say, the other myth, no? There's no satisfying or successful academic life out of the top journal game. That's, I think, a myth that is kind of busted by the European academia, that it's possible to have both, or not just one, but a lot of other things together. So, and I think the work-life balance is very much prioritized. So I always say we are not aware, or many people in Europe are not aware of how luxurious or how comfortable life is for us here, because you have the social security system, the nice infrastructure, small distances, everyone is kind of connected to each other, like richness, culture, history, everything is kind of in the right place. Of course, like there are negative sides as well, but I was surprised that in Netherlands, like if I was first starting my job after the PhD as an assistant professor, and at 5:30 p.m. there was no one left in the office, in the building, and by 8 p.m. the security guards started wandering the corridors, and by I think 9 they were locking the door. They were kicking you out. So the idea is like, go spend time with your family. Don't just define yourself with your work, which actually ends up like, if you look at the time spent at work, like per hours, I think the Northern Europe is kind of the lowest. Spain is not very good in that, but I think it's kind of in the middle. But compared to countries that are like, people are destroying them, not just in academia, I think they just sleep in their offices just to get things done. You don't have that in Europe. And still the outcome is, I think, in terms of how the quality is, I think it's very value added hours. Every hour you're at work is very much, let's say, value added. I mean, Asada, I think, is kind of more towards the, let's say, American style, but in the weekends, I cannot come to my office, for instance. It's closed. The building is closed. In the holidays, you cannot come to the office. So those things, I think, our work-life balance is much, much better, I think, in that sense. So advice for some of the young fellows, the folks that are interested in European market in general. Now I'm talking, of course, you have the top schools that are not necessarily aligning with this, just the American style structure they have, but you might want to focus on these funding priorities, join the networks. No, I think many of you mentioned networking, but there's a European strong network that you might want to be part of. There's all these, one of them is COST, for instance, actions, which stands for the European Cooperation of Science and Technology. Again, cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary collaborations. Publishing, of course, all of us target for top journals, but I have seen in many schools in Europe, you might be okay, let's say, but it's more like checking boxes. It's not like doing amazing in research and avoiding the other things, but it's basically performing above average or well enough in all the dimensions, might be as a package valued more than, let's say, having 10 tops and then do nothing in service, for instance, right? So, or I think some people, especially qualitatively oriented research methods, people can find a lot of value by going to the local, I mean, it's international, but EGOS is a big community, very active, and their journal org studies, I think, is kind of the place for Europeans to identify themselves. I'm not a regular person in EGOS, but I kind of enjoy the European network whenever I go there. Some final thoughts. As I said, Europe is not a homogeneous piece. I think Teresa mentioned about Africa being also formed by 54 countries. I think it's also similar kind of approach from different perspectives to Europe. Is like it's a very diverse setup. Sometimes bureaucracy or the cultural differences and the funding challenges might require some adaptability. And it's a nice balance, I would say, between teaching, research, and normal like private life for you. So thank you so much. I mean, I had some stereotypes, of course, mentioned. I wanted to end with some funny stuff so we can laugh a little. You probably might have seen this, but these are, I think, the ones that I believe that are true. Olive oil and butter, sunny and cloudy, good cuisine, bad cuisine. I think these are true stuff. There are many. Some people don't believe this, but these are my own, of course, takes for the heterogeneity you can see. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dillian Hannever. Thank you for ending on such a funny note. I think with many of the divisions, I would agree. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time. We're already a little bit over, but I think the panelists, each of them, did a fantastic job, gave a very detailed overview. So you definitely got a good flavor of the academic career in the different regions. I hope I can say if